A man frantically climbs onto a sled and flees into the white void. Behind him, his wife screams his name, her voice cracking with desperation. He never looks back. Not once. She watches him disappear into the horizon, swallowed by endless snow. And just like that, she's alone. Alone with her 5-year-old son, who's dying of tuberculosis. Alone in one of the most desolate places on Earth. This wilderness that seemed beautiful moments ago has transformed into a death trap. Her husband Jack was violent, yes. Their marriage was broken, yes. But this, she never imagined this. Her body trembles uncontrollably, not from the cold, but from pure terror. The family trip that began with hope has become a nightmare, and the only choice she has now is to walk, to survive, or die trying. This is the true story of Ada Blackjack, and what happened to her is beyond anything you could imagine. Her name was Ada Blackjack, though she was born Ada Delutuk. She was Inupiat, from one of the most isolated indigenous communities in Alaska. Her parents wanted better for her, so they sent her to Nome, the only nearby town where missionaries raised her. At 16, she married Jack Blackjack, the man who would one day abandon her in the frozen wilderness. They had 3 children. Only one survived. Bennett, the boy now walking beside her through the snow, was chronically ill and weak. She worried about him every single day. The distance to Nome was 40 miles. 40 miles through sub-zero temperatures, across ice and snow, through a landscape devoid of human life. Ada walked all day, carrying Bennett when his small legs gave out. As night fell, she found an abandoned logging cabin. She held her son close, terrified he would freeze. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. When dawn broke, she started walking again. It took them 3 days to reach Nome. Now she had to survive. She needed food. She needed medicine for Bennett. But in 1920s America, being an Inupiat woman meant almost no opportunities. Racism was brutal and systematic. She couldn't even afford 1 meal a day. Then she heard about an orphanage that would feed Bennett, give him medicine, and care for him. The thought of separating from her only surviving child was agony, but she had no choice. She would work, make money quickly, and bring him home. That was the plan. Then she saw the advertisement. An Arctic expedition was recruiting. They needed someone from Alaska who spoke English and could sew fur clothing and repair leather. Ada was an expert at leatherwork. Growing up with white missionaries, she'd learned to cook their food too. She was perfect for the job. After interviewing with 4 expedition members, she agreed to join them. The job seemed simple enough, sewing and cooking. Room and board included. $50 a month. Not much, but after a year, she'd have enough to get Bennett back. That's all that mattered. The expedition was organized by Vilhjalmur Stephenson, an Irish-American and experienced Arctic explorer. His plan was to claim Wrangel Island for his own colonial venture. He assembled a 4-man team with expertise in geography and science, appointing 20-year-old Alan Crawford as leader. But strangely, Stephenson himself didn't go. He stayed in America, claiming he needed to make money through lectures. First, he approached the Canadian government. They weren't interested in some remote island north of Russia. He tried Britain. Another rejection, but Stephenson didn't give up. He used his fame to secure private funding. Maybe he was selling swampland to people who didn't know any better. The truth was, this expedition wasn't about science or exploration. It was about developing luxury Arctic tourism for the wealthy, exploiting resources, and feeding Stephenson's ego. Because of insufficient funding, the expedition made fatal mistakes from the start. Stephenson found durable, lightweight leather boats for $120. Too expensive, he decided. He bought smaller, uncomfortable wooden boats instead. During the voyage, the boats were swept away by currents. Lost, gone. Even worse, Stephenson filled his inexperienced team's heads with lies. He told them the Arctic had abundant game. Don't worry about food or survival supplies, he said. He sent them north with only 6 months of provisions. They'd originally planned to hire more Inupiat guides, but everyone except Ada refused, recognizing the danger. Ada didn't want to go either. 4 strange white men, a dangerous journey to nowhere. But staying meant watching Bennett die slowly, working for pennies. She visited a shaman before leaving. The shaman told her death and danger lay ahead. Beware of fire and knives, the shaman warned. On September 9th, 1921, 23-year-old Ada, 4 white men, and a cat named Victoria set sail for the Arctic. 7 days later, on September 16th, they reached Wrangel Island. Stephenson's team lacked equipment and experience. They planted a flag but couldn't return home. The sled dogs were exhausted from the long voyage. When they set up camp, they discovered much of their food had already spoiled. Still, they weren't too worried. Stephenson had promised abundant game, but they soon discovered the brutal truth of Arctic survival. Ada noticed immediately that the island was full of polar bears. She was terrified of them. The fear, combined with isolation, loneliness, and homesickness, pushed Ada into what was known as Arctic hysteria during that first month. She became emotionally unstable, frequently clashing with the team leader Crawford. Life on the island grew increasingly difficult. Unable to cope, Ada often left camp, forcing the men to prepare their own food. To expand their hunting grounds, the team spread out across the island, setting up tents miles apart. But even 25 miles away, Ada would trek to Crawford's camp just to argue with him. It happened repeatedly. Winter arrived, and the cold became extreme. The sun disappeared completely, plunging them into endless night. Average temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. With no animals to hunt, the men spent most of their time in tents. Ada felt increasingly isolated. Suicidal thoughts crept in. The men didn't trust her. They treated her coldly, worsening her psychological state. She remembered the shaman's warning. Whenever she saw the men handling knives, terror seized her. The prophecy felt real. She imagined that once she finished making the leather goods they needed, they would kill her. One day, she walked into the cold, holding a bottle of painkillers, considering ending it all. She stopped only when she thought of Bennett. Another day, she followed fox tracks away from camp. She believed the foxes were spirits in disguise, who would treat her kindly if she found them. Meanwhile, the men regretted bringing Ada, but instead of offering warmth or encouragement, they mocked her. They starved her. They tied her to a post and threatened to make her sleep outside in the freezing cold. If she didn't change her behavior, Ada knew no one was coming to help her. She forced herself to focus on work, tried being friendly with the men. Gradually, their relationship improved. When summer finally came, the island teemed with wildlife again. The 5 of them felt renewed hope. A rescue ship would come. They would go home. But summer passed. Winter returned. No rescue ship appeared. What they didn't know was that the rescue vessel, the teddy bear, had become trapped in ice and was forced to turn back. As the ice around the island thickened, hope of rescue vanished. They would have to survive another winter. By the end of September, wildlife began disappearing. Their food supplies dwindled rapidly. What they had left was nowhere near enough for winter. By January 1923, the situation was desperate. They were all starving. 28-year-old American Lorne Knight was gravely ill. Winter hunts yielded almost nothing. They returned empty-handed again and again. Finally, they made the terrible decision. They couldn't stay any longer. 3 of the men decided to leave Ada and the bedridden Lorne Knight behind. It couldn't have been easy for them either. They promised to return soon or send rescue. Taking only light packs, they set off. Ada could only watch them leave, clinging to a thread of hope. Now Ada was left on the Arctic island with Victoria, the cat, and Lorne Knight, who could barely leave his bed. She did her best to care for him, serving as his nurse, companion, and servant simultaneously. She also had to provide food for both of them, which meant hunting. Ada set traps for Arctic foxes. She taught herself to shoot, hunting birds. She nursed Knight, bathed him, even emptied his bedpan. But instead of gratitude, Knight treated her cruelly, complaining constantly. The worst part, she later said, was when he blamed her for his children's deaths. But Ada kept hunting, chopping wood, doing everything necessary to survive. She was growing stronger. She learned to use a typewriter and occasionally wrote diary entries. Her awkward words revealed how emotionally difficult everything was. She remained especially terrified of polar bears. Her greatest fear was a bear attack. She built barriers in front of the tent so she could spot bears from a distance. She stacked boxes at the tent entrance to prevent wildlife from entering. She made shelves to keep survival tools, like guns and binoculars, easily accessible. She hung a rifle next to her bed for immediate use. Then one day, Ada finally shot a polar bear. She overcame the fear that had haunted her. Ada was becoming a different person. She survived the Arctic winter alone. During this time, Knight grew weaker. As winter turned to summer, he handed Ada a Bible. Then he died. In her diary, Ada wrote simply about his passing. Left with only Victoria the cat, Ada continued waiting for the three men, who had left for rescue the previous year. No news came. They never returned. All three are presumed to have died along the way. How much longer would Ada have to stay here? What she missed most was her son Bennett. It had been 2 years. He must have grown so much. The hope of returning to Nome and finding him was what kept her strong. Ada no longer struggled with survival itself, but the hope of actually leaving this place and returning home was fading. When bored, she played with the cat, went hunting, and occasionally took photographs. On the evening of August 19th, 1923, Ada was wearing a heavy cloth jacket, preparing a simple meal. As she sat down to eat, she heard something like a whistle. At first, she thought it was an animal, but the next morning, she heard it again. This time, she realized it was a ship's whistle. Grabbing her binoculars, Ada rushed outside. In the distance, she saw sailors walking along the coast. She jumped. She cried tears of joy. Ada had spent 703 days on the island. Her rescuer was Captain Harold Noyce of the schooner Donaldson. When he heard how Ada had survived, he was astonished. Noyce later said he'd met many so-called heroes in his life, but none had impressed him like her indomitable spirit. He called her a real-life Robinson Crusoe. The ship's crew said Ada had adapted so perfectly to her environment that she could probably have survived several more years. Ada finally ended her nightmare of isolation and was reunited with Bennett and her sisters. Her incredible story and the expedition's tragic ending spread rapidly across Canada and America. Ada became a media sensation, celebrated as a hero. But all she wanted was to escape the attention and live happily with her son. Ada was paid for her 2 years in the Arctic. Though she received less than the promised $50 per month, she used this money, plus what she earned, selling the furs she'd collected, to buy a house. She, Bennett, and Victoria the cat returned to normal life together. Many books and news articles were written about Ada's expedition and survival, but she received no money from them. Worse, some blamed her for not properly caring for Lorne Knight, claiming she let him die. These stories of heroism, controversy, and criticism were all profitable. Stephenson, who organized the expedition, exploited them to make money, but he also faced criticism for planning such an irresponsible and poorly prepared expedition. Ada's son Bennett died in 1975 of a stroke at age 58. Ada suffered the pain of losing her son again. She returned to Nome, her childhood home, where she spent her final years. In 1983, she died at age 85. Ada was buried alongside Bennett in Anchorage Memorial Park. Recorded as a hero of the Wrangel Island expedition, her story of courage, composure, compassion, and survival against impossible odds continues to inspire people a century later. This woman, abandoned by her husband, exploited by ambitious men and left to die in the Arctic, became one of history's greatest survivors. Not because she was superhuman, but because she refused to give up. She had someone to live for. She had Bennett. And that made all the difference.